Good evening. Ellen, do you want me to? Good. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Dana Sandweiss, and along with Stephen Davis, we are co-hosts for tonight's program. Our program focuses on the important topic that concerns all of us, the rise in anti-Semitism. We've assembled a panel and a moderator, our community security director, Scott Biondo, who are experts in their respective fields to help us understand and navigate how they work together and individually on combating anti-Semitism, handling hate crimes, and what safety measures are taking place in our community. As the title of our event explains, our goal tonight is facts, not fear. The Jewish community of St. Louis is committed to making our community a safe place to live, worship, and enjoy life. Did you know that last year, Scott conducted 85 security trainings to over 1,200 people in our community? Thank you, Scott. When you attend an event in the Jewish community, have you noticed Scott or other security there? Yes. Last year, through Federation's security program, we provided security for 130 events. How can we do this? It's through your support of our annual campaign that helps fund the resources to train our partner agencies and other organizations to help keep us safe. Tonight, our program is taking place at the new St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, a world-class museum which opened its doors last November. The museum is dedicated to using the history and lessons of the Holocaust to reject hatred, promote understanding, and inspire change. We'd like to thank the museum for hosting us tonight. Thank you. This museum is an important organization we invest in through your support of Federation's annual campaign.
Our program tonight is brought to you by the Legal Division of Professional Society. Professional Society is a giving society made up of donors in the financial services, legal, healthcare, business, and real estate fields. We provide programs that are of interest to you, our members, and we hope through these programs we can introduce our guests, not yet familiar with the work of Federation, to the important role we play in the community. Professional Society is great about connecting professionals in various industries in our Jewish community. For me, it's been a valuable networking tool as well as learning more about the good work and impact of Jewish Federation. Before we introduce our panel, I would like to thank our incredible event committee for their creativity in helping us plan tonight's event. Your input and support is so appreciated. Please stand so you can be recognized. Thanks to these hardworking committee members, all the attorneys here tonight are going to be eligible to receive 1.2 CLE Ethics Elimination of Bias credits. And you'll be able to get the certificates on your way out tonight. So thanks for doing that as well. We would also like to recognize a few special individuals who play an important role in professional society and in Jewish Federation. And if you could stand up or wave when I say your name as well. Sharon Remus, Vice Chair, Legal Division. Sandy Boxerman, Professional Society Chair. Kobe Wartakowski, Vice Chair, Development. Bob Newmark, Jewish Federation Board Chair. Larry Gast, Vice President of Development. Stacy Wagerman, Senior Director, Women's Philanthropy and Affinity Groups. And Ellen Sewell, Professional Society and Corporate Partnerships Officer. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Francis Levine, Interim Director of the Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. Thank you. And finally, we would like to thank our presenting sponsor of Professional Society, Reuben Brown. We are so appreciative of their support of Jewish Federation and of professional society. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jeff Sparks, partner at Reuben Brown and a member of the Leadership Advisory Council for Professional Society.
Thank you, Stephen and Dana, for that introduction. Reuben Brown is proud to be both a donor and a sponsor of Jewish Federation in support of various events for many years. We are pleased to sponsor professional society and events like this as we spend a significant amount of time at Reuben Brown focusing on diversity and inclusion efforts. Later this year, we'll be having a firm-wide training at Reuben Brown on anti-Semitism. This is such an important topic to be discussed in the community. We hope that everyone will leave here tonight with a deeper understanding and appreciation and bring at least one thing they learned back to their professional lives. I would now like to introduce tonight's moderator and director of community security for the Jewish Federation of St. Louis, Scott Biondo. Many of you are, absolutely, let's give another round of applause. As Dana mentioned, many of you have probably spotted Scott at various community events. I have a few more fun facts about Scott. In his role, Scott is responsible for 60+ entities, including multiple houses of worship and a community of 75,000 persons ranging from Paducah, Kentucky to Joplin, Missouri, and includes Southern Illinois, the St. Louis Metro, and outstate Missouri locations. So we truly cover the whole region here. Scott has been in this role for 4 years, and prior to that, he consulted to the Jewish community for more than 20 years. Please welcome Scott to tonight's events.
Have to make sure that I have the microphone color on green is what I've been informed. So can everyone hear me? All right, very good. This is pretty exciting. I'm very happy to be here. So I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I want to also thank our sponsor, Reuben Brown, for this opportunity to bring to you some really impressive folks that work with me on a frequent basis in doing everything we can to protect the Jewish community. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our distinguished panel this evening. First person I'd like to introduce is Christine Krug. Christine is the Assistant United States Attorney with the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Missouri. Christine. Come on. Sure. Come on up, Christine. All right. Next, we have on our panel this evening, Jay Greenberg. Jay is the special agent in charge of the FBI's St. Louis office. Excited to have Jay with us tonight. Please, Jay. And then last but certainly not least, my friend Jordan Kadosh, who is the regional director of ADL Heartland Region. Jordan. So in my role as the Director of Community Security, I frequently work with the members of this panel and their offices. I can say that is the incredible cooperation and partnerships that we have that ensures that we're doing everything we can to keep this St. Louis Jewish community safe. I'm going to quickly start with an overgeneralized view of how information is both captured and how it is used in this collaboration between the individuals you see here today and myself. So the overarching Jewish community security program utilizes what we'd call a very robust intelligence-led program. This program includes community-wide relationships that were developed, training programs, and information gathering from multiple sources. Many times that information is presented to our law enforcement partners to determine criminality and subsequent prosecution possibilities, or it may just be information that we continue to monitor. The receipt of this information comes in many different forms. Some of this information actually comes from you, our community. We have a very impressive program of community engagement, and our community is often the source of information coming to our offices. Sometimes it's from outside the community, other relationships that each one of you has in a wider based community. Let me just say this. You've all heard of the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing. Kevin Bacon has nothing on the Jewish community. Okay, so we have, I usually say it's like the 2 degrees of being a Jew. So, we have way quicker communication, and it gets to me much faster than poor Kevin Bacon could ever imagine. It also comes from our professional community. I can't even tell you how many times Jordan and I are on the phone discussing information that we found out about. He's telling me about something. I'm telling him about something. We're strategizing on, where this information goes next and what best way to use that information. But it also comes from, ADL National as well, who has an incredible intelligence-led program for looking out for you, the Jewish community. The Jewish Federations of North America has a security branch called the Secure Communities Network that is also out there looking for information on potential threats to the community and passing that information on. And then also from law enforcement. Sometimes that information actually comes backwards from law enforcement, such as our partners at the FBI, to alert us that they've become aware of a potential threat to this community. So this intelligence-led way of securing this community is just really, really important. And it's also pretty effective, as you'll see as we talk about some things throughout the program. So these are really the backbone of our program, these relationships. But now we're going to just jump into this program, talking about anti-Semitism, hate, and what we're doing about those things to keep this community safe. If we could go ahead, panelists, and grab our microphones. So you remember the days of the microphone where you could just turn on the on button? Now this one's like a multi-step, like you couldn't do this in a crisis because we say, we're supposed to use like gross motor skills in a crisis, right? Like one push of a button, not, I have to have Professor Jones with the candlestick and it can't have all these different things. You got yours on? There we go. Good. Let's do a test.
Testing.
Oh my goodness. There we go. You didn't have to do anything? I think Brady came up and did it while we weren't looking. So
Right,
that's
but I
good.
had the training.
Yes, that's okay. He's got it. We're good to go. So actually, my first question is going to be for Christine. And I'd like to have Christine describe for you what the U.S. Attorney's role is in fighting anti-Semitism.
So interestingly, that I'm the one starting this because the U.S. Attorney's Office would handle what would be the end result, right, of a hate crime investigation. But to give you an overview of what we do, nationwide, U.S. Attorney's offices are working to combat anti-Semitism in many ways. We are investigating crimes with our law enforcement partners. We are seeking to really expedite the review of those cases. For any of you who have worked in the federal court system, you may know that it does not move at the speed of light. So we are working on getting those cases reviewed and prosecuted as soon as we can. And then obviously, if we charge something, then we go through with the prosecution. We are working on training with our local and state law enforcement partners and also engaging them in the investigations with our federal partners over there at the FBI. We are trying to actively have more reporting. What we know is historically the reporting of hate crimes has been very low. And it is so important, and you're going to hear this, I'm quite certain, throughout this program. Reporting anything that happens is of so much importance because even if you think it can't go anywhere or you think it's not prosecutable, it is. I can't say how important it is that we have the information, right? That the FBI has the information, that local law enforcement has the information, because what may have happened to one person might not seem like something that is recognizable or prosecutable, but sometimes you put all those little pieces together and it becomes something very big and very relevant to the community. The criminal division at the U.S. Attorney's Office works again, on investigations primarily with our federal partners at the FBI. Jay will tell you he has a squad that handles civil rights cases exclusively. They are well-trained. They are fantastic to work with. And we work on cases. They come in, sometimes they're not prosecutable as hate crimes. We do everything we can to prosecute those cases. And sometimes that means that we go and we look for other charges, right? So it might not be that we can prove all the elements of what would be considered a hate crime, but maybe we can prove a felon in possession case. Maybe we can prove a cyber stalking case. Maybe we can prove someone sent a threatening communication, because it's very important that we hold these offenders accountable. And sometimes what comes in as one thing is not how it ends up, but we definitely want to hold them as accountable as we possibly can. I recognize we have a lot of lawyers in the audience. So one of the things I was going to talk about was how the federal criminal justice system works. But I think probably you could look to your left or look to your right or both and get that information from your colleagues here in the room. So I would also point out, sometimes people don't report because, you know, it's a lot to deal with. It's hard. But both the FBI and our office have victim services advocates. All right. So you would have anyone who reports a crime to the FBI and to our office, there is support, right? There's someone to keep you informed of the process as it goes through the criminal justice system. There's someone to help find you resources if you need them. So please be aware that if something does happen, that there is that support out there. And what many people don't recognize is that the U.S. Attorney's Office is not just made up of a bunch of prosecutors. I mean, we have a lot of them, that is true. But we also have a civil division, and our civil division has some tools to fight anti-Semitism as well. So discrimination within housing, within employment, within education, they would handle those complaints and any civil lawsuits that might come up.
Thank you, Christine. And I'll just reiterate that that's one of the last statements that Christine made. Sometimes that's the tool that we are able to use to move forward on some of these cases. So Jordan, I'm going to come to you next. Jordan, obviously you and I are continuously working together to protect this community by investigating hate incidents to determine if there is a criminal nexus or possibly some actionable intelligence that we can use to further security preparedness. So along the same vein of what Christine was describing, let's talk a little bit more from your perspective on just why it is so important that we report. And this is going to be a theme throughout this because it really is something that we rely on to keep this community safe. Could you talk a little bit about that, Joe?
Sure, and thanks for having me. It's really nice of you to invite me.
Absolutely.
I was driving home from Minneapolis yesterday, and Scott called, and I had to say, "Hey, Scott, how are you? You're on speakerphone, and my whole family is in the car. Should I pick up the handset?" Before we started our conversation, because Scott and I have what I like to describe as the largest collection of swastikas outside of this museum in our text chain.
This is true.
It's really important that we're always in contact with each other. At ADL, my office actually takes in incidents. So if you go to adl.org and you click on the little triangle with the exclamation point in it, you can fill out a report of bias, bigotry, hatred, or anti-Semitism of any kind that you encounter, even if it happened to somebody else, even if it's not a crime, even if it's protected speech. And we're obligated to work those cases. We also protect anonymity of anybody who reports to us. Sorry. So we are a safe place to report. But when we do get information in, it's important that we share with our partners at least what happened, if we can't share who it happened to. And you should know that our national organizations, Scott was describing SCN, ADL is obviously a big place. We actually have redundancies on the back end as well, where we share information on a regular basis to make sure that nothing is missed, because we're all human and we're doing our best and there's not enough of us. So if you see something, say something, as everybody else is going to tell you tonight, but it's important, it adds up. And we don't know what we don't know. And if you think you told someone already, tell us twice. We're happy to have the information.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate that. So Jay, I'm going to come to you next here. in the Jewish community, because of the infrastructure that we do have in place, whether that be Jordan and myself, your office actually often gets reports on potential hate crimes or incidents outside of the information that we share with you. Tell us a little bit about how your office receives cases from other sources, but maybe about our community.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. And I'll echo what Jordan said. It is a real privilege to be with you here tonight. So thank you for having me and having me up here. I'm going to triple down on what you've heard from Christine and Jordan. And that is one of our primary mechanisms for hearing about hate crimes is you. It is people who are sitting out here right now knowing that the first thing we need to start an investigation, the first thing we need to start providing more tailored protection for a situation that you or a loved one or a colleague may be in is knowing that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And so reporting is key. You can report it through ADL. You can report it at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can report it at tips.fbi.gov. You can report it by calling our field office. You can look up the phone number on the web and you can call us directly. We will take that report. You can report it to your local police. All of those intake areas will wind up in the same place, which is with us and with local partners. If you're ever in physical danger, if you have concern there's somebody outside who is intent on harming you, you should get to a safe place, pick up your phone and call 911. Once you have done that, you can then look up our office number or go to tips.fbi.gov and make sure that we know what's happening as well. There was a case here within the last year in St. Louis where there was an angry caller making anti-Semitic statements and statements of violent intent to commit violent attacks on the grounds of one of the temples here locally. And the local police responded, and we responded very quickly. And ultimately, the U.S. Attorney's Office brought federal charges and helped resolve that, I believe, to the community's satisfaction. So, that report is a key coming from you. There are a couple of hundred people here. The Jewish population makes up about 2.4% of the American population. So back in the napkin math, there's another 6,999,800 people out there who aren't with us tonight. But we can use your 2 degrees of separation that we heard about from Scott to our advantage, which is if you get a call from somebody or you're in contact with somebody who's in contact with somebody, make sure they know to report, that we want to receive those reports. And to Christine's point, not every report will generate an investigation or a prosecution, but every single report will be reviewed. And if there's anything we can do, we will do it. So our primary sources of input on civil rights cases and anti-Semitic cases or cases of a Jewish bias, they would come from ADL, they would come from SEN, they would come from Jewish Federation, they would come from citizens like yourself. A lot of them come from local departments. We do a tremendous amount of liaison and outreach with all of our local and state partners. And so they know as well, if we hear about a crime that may be a local crime, as well as a potential federal hate crime, they know to call us. And so it is not uncommon that my phone will ring on a Saturday night and there's a chief of police calling to say, hey, not sure if you're tracking this. We're running out on an address. We want to make sure you know what's happening because you may have an interest here as well. So really calling and reporting is the best step that you can take because that local department will link up with us. All these other channels will link up with us and we will get that case investigated and we will do everything we can to provide you all the rights you have under the law and to explain what's happening. So Scott, I'm going to just real quick, because we've talked a lot about this sort of generically. We're going to go over a definition of a hate crime a little bit later, right? Okay, good. Then I won't get into it now because I think that's important to do up front so everybody knows exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, very good. And I'll just echo real quickly about the idea of cooperation. The Jewish community here in the St. Louis metro area is situated in about 16 different police jurisdictions. And in my area of responsibility, that number goes up to about 24. So it's a pretty large array of local law enforcement that we work with all the time. The interesting thing about the case that Jay alluded to was that the FBI desk, the person that takes the calls that came in, immediately reached out to our community, reached out to me, had a conversation with me. Because we were using this intelligence-led preparation for potential incidents, we actually knew who the individual was immediately. We knew where that individual lived. We were able to share that information with our law enforcement partners, and we were able to direct the law enforcement, that in that case, the fugitive squad, to where that individual was, literally down to where they were at that moment, because we also coordinate with all of our law enforcement officers that provide security at our synagogues for Shabbat. So that phone call from the FBI led to a phone call from me to our officer at that particular synagogue, who then advised me that if they go to his house, he won't be there. He just walked by me. So that's just how, important it is to have that connection. I then received a phone call from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from individuals there, about making sure that this didn't turn into a case where the individual's taken into custody. There may be some, mental health issues, and during the course of evaluation, they sign themselves out of the hospital AMA, right? We don't have that type of a situation because we had all the right people, all the right players involved in that situation to make sure that it was followed through in the appropriate manner. So very, very important, the relationships that we talk about. So I'm going to actually have Christine do this because she is the attorney, and we did kind of jump out there with a little bit of an overview of what each of the groups do. But now we're going to get into that whole idea of hate crime, hate incidents, and a definition of both of those. Christine, you want to take that one for me?
Sure, Scott, happy to. And that is an excellent question because there's frequently confusion. What's the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident? All hate crimes are hate incidents, but not all hate incidents are hate crimes, right? So there's kind of a Venn diagram and overlap there. A hate crime is a traditional crime, but it's motivated by bias of some sort. And there are, we could go through some statutes if you'd like, but I don't think anybody wants to do that. But they all address different types of hate crimes and bias. A hate incident might be offensive speech, right? It could be awful. It could be an obnoxious sort of behavior. But the First Amendment, and we're going to talk about the First Amendment a little bit more later, I know, that may not be a hate crime as a result. I once heard hate incidents described as awful but lawful, right? And it's terrible. And there are sometimes things I would like to be able to prosecute that I can't, but that's part of the business that we're in. As an assistant U.S. attorney, I'm dealing with the federal laws that exist. But what I will also say, as a former state prosecutor and as someone who works routinely with state prosecutor offices, is that there are also state laws that could be utilized in holding offenders accountable. Missouri itself has an interesting version of a hate crime law because it's not really a hate crime law. It's a punishment enhancement for certain crimes. And the Missouri statute, you can have that enhancement following a conviction for certain crimes that the state believes were knowingly motivated because of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, or disability of the victim. Those are the crimes that are available to be enhanced under that statute are typically a lower level crime. There are some misdemeanors that become low level felonies and some low level felonies that become higher level felonies. But if we are dealing with a higher level felony, and hopefully we are not, right? I mean, that's where we don't want to be, but the punishment for those levels of felonies are already quite high. So what Missouri has done is bumped up things that might seem not as severe because of the bias motivation. So those are also possibilities. And as I mentioned, we are frequently working with our state partners to make sure that offenders are held as accountable as possible. And Scott, I think we talked about this before, but as far as indicators for, things that might help us determine is this a hate crime, right? We're looking at, is the perpetrator someone who is targeting someone in a class, a protected class that they don't belong to? Has that person made written statements, verbal statements, statements in social media that might be concerning? Are they having markings and symbols and graffiti of a certain nature, particularly anti-Semitic, that would cause us concern? Does that person belong in a group, whether formal or informal, that perpetuates hate in some form or another? We're looking to all those types of pieces of information to help us determine, is this a hate incident or is this a hate crime? Is there a pattern? And I'm going to go right back to, you heard pattern, right? So what's next? Report, 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 report. Because one person is not going to show us a pattern, but many reports that are similar give us that information, and that sometimes we can actually do something with that collection of reports that we might not be able to do with one or two or even three.
Thank you, Christine. And I'll just fill in a little piece here with regards to incidents that don't actually rise to the level of criminality. Organizations like the ADL and like the Jewish Federation, we actually look at these folks that are doing these types of things. And because we don't have to necessarily have the nexus to criminality that our federal partners do, to continue to look at these individuals, we will continue to monitor those individuals. They've now put themselves on our radar. So we now can continue to monitor them. And we do that through our intelligence-led program. So not unlike the Jewish Federation, ADL is always working in the background through their various centers to curb and investigate anti-Semitism. Just like I said, we can look at this stuff and we can investigate this, and we can find additional information that may be valuable to our law enforcement partners, to the U.S. Attorney's Office in trying to develop a case. But Jordan, I'd like you to do a real quick overview. The ADL has 3 distinct centers. Could you talk about those centers and what their role is?
Thanks for the easy one. I appreciate it. So the Center on Anti-Semitism Research is our research center that actually aims to quantify anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. One of the things we do is we survey the American population every year. We've been asking the same questions for 60 years. And do you agree with these following anti-Semitic statements, these following tropes? And so over the last 3 years, these numbers have nearly doubled, right? And so whatever it is you're feeling out there, or whatever it is you're noticing, you're not imagining it. It's real, and we're aiming to quantify it. But there's also things that are hidden in the research that we can all do to interrupt this cycle of hate. And one of the things that we noticed this year is that people who were interviewed who had some sort of interaction with Holocaust education in their formative years through a scholastic setting actually agreed with the fewest number of anti-Semitic tropes. So museums like this one that we're gathered at tonight actually make a real difference with their school tours, and it sticks with people. And we know that that work is worthwhile. Our second research center, the Center of Technology and Society. This is the group of researchers who keep tabs on the platforms that we all interact with on these devices with 3 cameras that we bring to the bathroom with us all the time. These platforms are where kids get their information. It's where young people interact, oftentimes more often or first before they interact with something in the real world. And so we survey places like chat rooms and online gaming, these kinds of things. And we notice things that like 10 to 17-year-olds, 15% of them are likely to encounter white supremacist ideologies in video games. And they're more likely to encounter it online in social media or inside of a video game before they're actually likely to encounter it in the real world. And our third research center is the one we're probably best known for. I think, Scott, you were alluding to, is the Center on Extremism. And these are the researchers that actually track individuals and groups and movements that subscribe to any kind of extremist ideology, be it right-wing violent ideologies that are anti-Semitic or left-wing violent ideologies that are anti-Semitic. So you often don't know where the threat would come from, but the goal is to keep tabs on people who are extreme and push them back to the fringes and keep this hate from becoming mainstream. And we do that to interrupt these extremists before it turns to violence.
Thank you, Jordan. And just so you don't think that these things are out there and they don't yield fruit, we actually had, I'll talk in generics, but we actually had an incident very similar to this, where one of our national organizations was able to provide information to us about an individual located right here in St. Louis. that was communicating with a foreign national regarding an attack on a Jewish organization. The individual was promoting that the attack be on a Jewish organization because you'll get a lot more press. And when you attack Jews, you're going to get the media involved and you're going to get a lot more coverage. But the good thing about it was that we began to monitor that activity and we were able to share, first of all, find out who the individual was. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that never comes to fruition in terms of an actual threat. But once we identified that individual, found out who they were able to share that information with our law enforcement partners. And through a group of folks that are out there protecting us all the time from things like terrorism, they do what's called a sort of a knock on the door and knock and introduce ourselves. But it's an opportunity for us to potentially curb a threat from an individual who, in this particular case, was not an adult. And it might be one of those cases where we can get adults involved, responsible adults, and we can actually shut down something before it materializes into a problem. And that's a success story from this type of a program, from working together with these partners that you see right here on this panel and actually potentially stopping something from moving forward. And I can tell you this, that sometimes parents, now this is going to be hard for you to believe, but sometimes parents actually don't know what their children are doing. And they don't know what their children are doing online for sure. But I can tell you this, good old fashioned, boy, are you going to be in trouble when these federal agents leave type of, response is still out there. So we can take heart in that. We talk a lot about the reporting. You kind of have an idea of what all of these organizations do. I want to carry on the reporting thing. There's something out there that's tracked by the FBI, hate crime statistics. And it basically is something that, is released in a yearly report that allows the community to kind of see what's going on out there. But, I want Jay to discuss with this group that whole process of hate crime statistic reporting and maybe some of the challenges with that too, Jay, like, for instance, are the numbers accurate? And if not, maybe why? Could you grab that one?
Sure. So a little bit about crime reporting in general. The FBI publishes annually the Uniform Crime Report for the nation. That involves one point of contact in each of the 50 states, being the trained point of contact who reports all of that state's criminal actions to a centralized database that we maintain, where we then publish trends that are happening across the nation and in each state and in each city that has a certain population size that goes with it. That is available on the internet. You can simply look up Uniform Crime Report and you can read the Uniform Crime Report year over year. And there is a great deal of analysis that looks at trends over time that is also available from those same places. In terms of hate crime reporting, we recently changed the system for all crime reporting in the nation that we use. And the old system was very easy. All the police departments were used to it. They knew exactly which steps to report which crimes. We had from the Department of Justice an investment of about $120 million to help police departments transition for 6 years, 5 to 6 years from the old system to the current system. And yet what we saw was that when we went to that new system for last year's reporting, 2021, we saw a drop in the percentage of departments that were providing reporting nationally to about 60% of the departments. So if you heard anything when we published figures last September about how we believe that there's underreporting because we just aren't hearing from the same number of departments, that's what drove that, was a system update. Now, I'm happy to say that our reporting here in the state of Missouri was at 81%, well above the national average. Before the system change, we had about 90% of the local law enforcement agencies that were reporting in Missouri. And so we did fall off, right? About 9% of agencies that had previously reported did not report into the 2021 figures that we published last September. But there is an effort here. I have obtained names of every department that did not report in the new system. I shared it with our local point of contact in the St. Louis Area Police Chiefs Association and at the state level, and they have been making personal calls to chiefs and to reports officers in different departments. So Scott hinted that there's a little bit that's difficult to report when it comes to hate crimes. In the old system could only handle one kind of crime report. So if you were to report, if a local police department was to report in the old system a murder that also may have a bias motivation, characterizing it also as a hate crime, the system would only capture the more severe of the crime. So it would record that in the old system as a murder. The new system's been upgraded. So there can be property vandalization or a murder or an assault that can be recorded under the state level as exactly that, but it can also be recorded as a potential hate crime. And the system can now capture that and parse it so that we have much richer data to review. What's difficult about that is that we've talked about a hate crime and how it requires a bias motivation. How do we know there was a bias motivation? So if somebody is screaming an epithet when they beat somebody or assault somebody who is in Orthodox attire and they're screaming epithets about Jews, that's really easy and quick to figure out that we have an assault here and we may have a hate crime. But when we just have any other kind of crime that occurs, it may take some period of investigation before we realize, well, this was a property vandalization, but it was also motivated by a bias that we find out the subject held after we thoroughly investigate that subject. And that can be a week after the crime, a month after a crime, 3 months after a crime, before we recognize that there's a bias motivation at play there. So that is what muddies the waters a little bit on making sure that we have accurate data. And it is just important that we get the reports from the communities who are experiencing this so that we can protect everybody and make sure that what we're seeing in the trends and what the numbers are showing is in fact aligned with what the community is experiencing.
Thank you, Jay. So we really covered a lot of ground on reporting, how important it is, on what those numbers mean, because those are the numbers that we're using to determine what the actual threat is out there. So it's very important for us to have as accurate of numbers as possible. Groups like Federation, like ADL, like our national organizations, we're actually reporting that information as well. And we're utilizing you, our community, to retrieve that information. So we're trying to capture as much as we can. And that's why there's often a conflict. You may see a report come out from the FBI saying, we had this many, hate motivated crimes last year in the United States. And then the ADL puts out a report and it might be significantly, higher, or there may be a disparity in the numbers, but it doesn't matter because it's all tracking. It's getting everybody used to reporting the information, and we'll take it any way we can get it. So that's what's really important. Now, sometimes, we are hindered by these folks that are out there that, you're saying, I just don't understand, why can't we do anything about this person? I mean, you should hear the kinds of things that they say. So with that, I'll just segue into let Christine just describe how First Amendment rights, because we brought that up before, how First Amendment rights, can hinder us moving forward with people that are out there saying some really, 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 really bad things.
Scott, do you mind if I jump a little bit back to the reporting piece?
Sure, please.
Again, reporting. Something I would point out, when Jay was talking about more investigation might be needed for us to know if it is a hate crime. Our local law enforcement agencies are understaffed. They are all short-staffed. They are all overworked. Some of them are very new, and they may not know the right questions to ask. So I would encourage you yourself and to share with anyone you might discuss this with, if you are reporting something to the police and they're asking you the questions, what happened, where did he hit you, or what was done? If you feel in your gut that you were targeted for a reason, okay, because you're Jewish, tell them that. All right. Even if it only makes it into a little bit of the police report, that gives us something to go on. And they may not know to ask the right questions. We are doing the best that we can to train as many law enforcement officers as possible, but let's help them. Okay. Let's give them the information that they need to do the right thing, to pass it on for a hate crime investigation to the FBI. So sorry, I can't help myself.
No, that's very
All right.
important.
All right. So there is a little thing called the First Amendment. And most every day of our lives, we appreciate it, right? We appreciate all the rights that it affords us. Courts in America have routinely upheld speech and behavior that we may find very offensive for whatever reason. But again, it goes back to the awful but lawful. And so we have to look to, is there more than just the offensive speech? So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back to talking about hate crime versus hate incident and go through something that might illustrate it a little bit. So hypothetically, we have a Jewish community center. It sits on a corner in a diverse neighborhood. And there is a group of men that walk by every Friday night and they yell anti-Semitic comments to whoever is out there to hear. So now that we're all educated, is that a hate crime or a hate incident? Hate incident, exactly right. So people can legally use hateful comments as long as they're not combining it with illegal actions. So then let's say that those same men are also defacing the property. They're painting swastikas, they're writing anti-Semitic language on the building. Has that changed it for us a little bit? Right. And so have we maybe gotten to a hate crime? Maybe. Have we gotten to a crime? Yes, right? We've got some property damage or vandalism, and we may be able to build that in because it's a place of worship, right? And I'm going to jump ahead to the next piece, that there's a synagogue there also at the community center, right? So that's our next part of the hypothetical. And what if those men are blocking the entrance so that congregants can't go in? Have we taken it up another notch? Right. So the first part of it, the hateful speech, it's protected. But once they start combining that with illegal actions, then we may have something that local law enforcement or the federal government can do something about. So keep that in mind. You might be thinking to yourself, is every kind of speech protected by the First Amendment? The answer is no. Okay. There are things called true threats. And I'm going to read this definition so I don't get it wrong. And I will tell you, I will start off by telling you that it is currently defined this way: a serious communication with an intent to commit an act of unlawful violence against an individual or group. The reason I say that it's currently defined that way is because there is a case currently pending in front of the United States Supreme Court regarding a true threat. It was argued in April, but it has not yet been handed down. So we don't know where they're going to come down on how true threat is defined moving forward. It's not a true threat if it just threatens financial or emotional harm, if it's political hyperbole, or if it's merely offensive, no matter how offensive, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Christine. Jordan, I'm going to jump over you for just a second, if you don't mind. And Jay, I'm just going to jump over to you real quick. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the public-private partnerships and how important these things are, programs that the FBI has to engage the public beyond what you've just talked about, things like InfraGard and groups like that, but also just the relationships that we have here in the community and how important those are. And maybe you can toss in a little bit about JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and our St. Louis Fusion Center as well.
Sure. So we have one of our big mission sets is outreach, so that people understand there's education out there and you understand when might it be right to call the federal authorities versus the local authorities. So this is why we do liaison. It's why we do outreach. It's why we're at events like tonight. And we conduct hundreds of these a year across our programs. In the cyber sphere, we're talking with all the major corporations. They're broken down into critical infrastructure that we know are considered the richest targets for our foreign adversaries, or for our criminal actors who happen to be either aligned with or sponsored by foreign adversaries. Constantly doing corporate outreach. Corporations can also be victimized in corporate frauds, right? Having their money stolen by somebody on the inside, embezzling money from them. So as we're talking with them about cyber, or we're talking with them about counterintelligence, we're talking with them about making sure they have the right financial controls in place so that they understand if somebody is stealing from them or there's something that's going awry on their books. Building on that, when we're in front of them, they're also members of the community, right? So we're going to talk about hate crimes. We're going to talk about what is terrorism, what is domestic terrorism, We have definitions under our terrorism program as well as under statutes, laws provided by Congress as to what constitutes a federal crime. And so we're constantly meeting with community members through our JTTF, through our Joint Terrorism Task Force, through our Cyber Task Force, through our White Collar Task Force, through our Violent Crime Task Force, and through our civil rights groups like tonight. We also have a working group in each of our field offices that is comprised of both my domestic terrorist investigating agents and analysts who support that effort, along with the civil rights investigating agents and the analysts who support that effort. And when we get a potential allegation of a civil rights crime, or there's a potential allegation of a domestic terrorist who is active in this area, they're talking to each other because they have expertise which helps each other, but it may lead to different actions and it may lead to different avenues for investigation. So there's one thing, Scott led with sort of a chilling story about, somebody being incited to attack the Jewish community because of driving media attention. We do have to have certain predication, legal foundation to start our investigations. I won't quiz you, but I'll just give you the answer right now. The FBI is actually not authorized to start looking at all of your social media feeds at any given minute. So you don't have to worry that I've got a room full of analysts who are looking at your social media feeds right now. However, there are a number of avenues that will generate the very low legal standard we do need to start reviewing somebody's social media feed or their public statements that they are putting out there, which all of you can look at, but I may be prohibited as an executive branch function from looking at without appropriate predication. That's where our JTTF works in concert with all of our state and local partners and the Fusion Center. The Fusion Center is a collection of police departments' feeds. So they're dispatch centers. They have access to specific databases that we make available. They also have specific access to databases that the Department of Homeland Security maintains. And so that Fusion Center is another form of a public-private partnership. You should really think about it. Remember, we used to hear about the Star Wars system that was going to sit up in space and it was going to shoot down missiles before it got here. That's really what your Fusion Center, the ADL, SCN, the Federation, the FBI, DHS, all of your state and local partners, there are rough men and women who are ready to jump into the fray at a moment's notice. So you don't need to worry that there are all these conversations happening in cyberspace and there's no way we're ever going to find them. We do find them. We will find them, and we will keep you safe from them if we're given enough lead time so that we can interdict that attack.
Thanks, Jake. And just a little comment on that. Jordan and myself often place or provide information to our Fusion Center and our Joint Terrorism Task Force in terms of individuals that have been brought to our attention. I even go as far as using the Fusion Center for events. If I have an event that's a controversial topic, controversial speaker, we'll put that information out there so that if they hear any chatter specific to that event, they'll know that there is actually something out there that could be a threat target. And then we can communicate about that and best decide how to provide the appropriate security for those events. So, it's very, very important, this sort of back and forth relationship that we have in sharing that information. So there's something I have to finish with, and it's going to be for Jordan, because there's a little something we have to cover for that CLE. So we're going to make sure that we cover that for all of you lawyers. And that is going to be that Jordan's going to talk to us a little bit about, I think, a specific case, maybe, I'm not sure, about how anti-Semitic tropes may affect an actual criminal case.
And just want to clarify one little thing from earlier. We get our hate crimes data from the FBI, from the Uniform Crime Report. We don't publish our own numbers. We do publish a separate analysis.
Yep.
So just making sure that the camera got that one. So in 1983, Barry Jacobson, he was convicted of arson for burning down his own vacation home in Massachusetts, allegedly for the insurance money, is what the prosecution claimed. And at the time, the foreperson of the jury actually made a public statement that said, those New York Jews come up here and think they can get away with whatever they want. And 40 years later, last year, this was actually presented back through the prosecutor's office, back to the court, and the conviction was vacated. after he had been maintaining his innocence for 40 years, because even though at the time nobody recognized this as a form of bias, it actually established it now under the law that you can't just have a biased jury and make a conviction like that, especially one based on an anti-Semitic trope for a motive. And so you can check your ethics credit box. I think we're good.
Checked. Very good. So we've been talking a lot about interaction, the interaction between all of us, all of our offices, the interaction that we have with local law enforcement, with our community, reporting things to us. Now we're going to have a little interaction with this group. This is the question and answer period of this. I hope that you've learned something from this. We have an extremely, knowledgeable panel here that's shared some incredible things. And I just hope that it's been a good program, but I want to hear from you now. What questions do you have? And by the way, let's see, just to coordinate this, we have a microphone on either side. I think we're going to grab a microphone there so that we can hear you. So we've got a question over here. Can we grab that one first?
So I actually have two questions. And this
Uh-oh.
is for Jay. You know, a few years ago, the president
Feeling targeted.
at
but
the
okay.
time,
Here we go.
Trump kind of legitimized the anti-Semitism from the white supremacists on that march by saying there's bad people on both sides, there's good people on both sides. How did the FBI react to a comment like that? And my second question is, how does a civil engineer become an FBI agent?
So one of my best friends is a civil engineer. I'm not a real engineer. I'm an industrial engineer. I couldn't have, I started electrical engineering and I just wasn't smart enough. So they switched me over to industrial engineering. I'll get to part two in a second. In terms of your question about, the former president and statements he's made, let me just say this. We recognize as an agency that we are dealing with an elevated rhetoric period right now on every side of every issue. And so rather than reacting specifically to something attributed to President Trump, we have identified white supremacy as the primary growth engine, unfortunately, for ongoing terrorist attacks in the nation. We are positioned against that very favorably. In spite of what you might read in the news, Congress has been very generous with our budgets the last several years. And so we have had an opportunity to continue to add personnel to conduct more and greater terrorism-based investigations across the nation and across the world. One thing we haven't really talked about is the ability to reach out and touch with the cyber network that goes around the world. We have footprints in about 80 different countries, and we have international partnerships at the national level with national police forces in every developed nation in the world. So if there is an actor in a country where we have friendly diplomatic relations, we have the ability to pass intelligence nearly real time. I had a case that I worked on with one of my agents when I was a supervisor about a decade ago, where we got a call overnight threatening a school shooting. We were able to chase that through the cyber dust that was available out there and find that person making that threat was actually in another country. I got our legal attaché out of bed in the middle of the night for that country and passed her the information, who passed it to the National Police Force. And there was one of these very uncomfortable knock and talks that Scott talked about the next morning very early in this foreign country, with that National Police Force asking, this young man why he said these things in a chat room overnight. So I'll just sort of lead with that in terms of recognizing that we do have a huge percentage of our resources focused on terrorism, and particularly on domestic terrorism, which is an actor here operating to try and either overthrow the government because of a bias with the use of force, or advance a political or social agenda with the use of force. And that's where you wind up on either side of the aisle. In terms of the FBI and how an engineer gets to be an FBI agent and sit up here in front of you, we hire a diverse background for all of our agent and analyst roles, because we recognize that diverse teams are stronger teams. And so by putting together teams of investigators, investigating a case is a lot like creating a 3D puzzle. And so what we find is, if you get a diverse group to solve that puzzle, engineers are going to approach it one way, Former military is going to approach another way. Former cops are going to do it another way. Accountants are going to do it another way. And if we put everybody together and we give them similar training and develop a similar language, they're going to come up with solutions that nobody would have come up with by themselves. It's really the concept of synergy and how we get from 2 + 2 to 5. So we do hire from all backgrounds. We're always hiring at fbijobs.gov. So if anybody's interested in any role, feel free.
Thanks for the job push there, Jay. All right, yes, please.
Scott, a couple of months ago, I heard an interview with Robert Kraft, who I think owns the Patriots.
Correct.
And he spoke about how proud he was to be Jewish and how he loved being Jewish. And he was starting a campaign that he had funded in a very large way of attacking anti-Semitism in a positive way. And he had a little symbol. It was sort of like a little blue rectangle. I haven't heard any more about it. And I wondered if anyone knows about it or what's happening with it.
Is that?
What? Oh, they did hand them out? Oh, good. So is it,
I'll
Is it
take
success?
care of you later with that, what we talked about.
okay, it's a success?
So that's actually the pen I'm wearing right now. And you know, I'll let Jordan is really good at tracking these campaigns and whether they have a level of success. So I'm going to let him just chat a little bit about that real quick.
Well, I think every Jewish organization in America signed on to this campaign. It was an exceedingly generous gift by the Kraft Foundation to take out a public information campaign highlighting people's experiences with anti-Semitism. I know JFNA has signed on. That's why Scott's got the pin. I'm wearing a different one this month, but ADL signed on as well. And so, yeah, I think we're all on board. They're very well done advertisements. If you've seen them, they hired a good shop.
Yeah, every little bit is important, folks. It's every one of these types of programs. It's every one of you speaking out, and it's all of us, you know, doing our jobs. So it's all important. Did you have another?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
it seems that in the last couple of weeks, maybe even already 3 weeks at least, there's been a constant amount of information coming out of the federal government of a definition of anti-Semitism from the Biden administration, which is getting attention through the newspapers. And that's where I find this out, through the postal space, certainly not listening to the radio or TV. It's from reading the papers. And it's what this definition is never really said. And then it always turns into the fact that there's another part of the definition that talks about the relationship between Zionism and anti-Semitism. Zion and is if a person is anti-Zionist, are they anti-Semitic? Because the ADL evidently is promoting that point of view through the leader of the ADL at this point, the national leader. Now, so first of all, I expected this discussion here tonight was going to have a big definition of anti-Semitism in it somewhere. Not happen at all. Now, so, and then I brought up I certainly have this question is anti-Zionism, and what's that relationship between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? Evidently, this came through mainly because of situations with the government in Israel right now, which is denying many rights to the Palestinians,
Okay,
claiming
sir,
that they're
can-
anti. Okay, enough. I've said
No, no,
enough.
no, no,
Take it
I
over.
I want to kind
I
of
got-
push that into a question, but I think we have some answers. And since you brought up the ADL, I'm going to once again defer to Jordan to at least respond to that portion. But thank you.
So recently, the Biden-Harris administration released a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. I think that this is stop for a moment, and this is kind of a watershed moment in American government. There's never been a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism before. The other things that have national strategies to combat them are things like climate change. So this is a very big deal. We at ADL were very happy to see the entirety of our combat plan integrated in the national strategy. There's over 200 points that it recommends. I know 100 of them were executive actions, including anti-Semitism and DEI training for federal employees. So you guys have that to look forward to. But in terms of the definition, there was a definition, there a working definition in the strategy. It's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. That is the one that ADL subscribes to. And I didn't bring my card in my pocket today, so I'm not going to read it off and get one word wrong on camera. But you can look it up. It's a widely accepted working definition, and we're very happy to see that is a part of the national strategy. As far as anti-Zionism, Zionism being the national aspiration of the Jewish people for their own self-determination in their ancestral homeland and the preservation of that state now that it exists is something that is a very big part of a lot of people's Jewish identities. And anti-Zionism should not be conflated with being anti-Israel or against particular Israeli policies. This is about whether or not the state of Israel has a right to exist. It does. And advocating for the displacement or removal or murder of all millions of Jews who live there is anti-Semitic. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic when you look at it through this lens. Now, you were addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and a bunch of other things. So let's solve Middle East peace real quick in the next 30 seconds. There are Arabs and Palestinians living under the Palestinian Authority. There are Arabs and Palestinians living in Gaza under the rule of a sanctioned terrorist organization. And there are Arab Israelis who live in Israel today. No one's going to sit here and argue that every single group has full rights under any particular government, but Israeli Arabs have full franchise. They're included in society. And Arabs who live in different territories live under different rule, and we can spend the next 3,000 years trying to solve the problem, but I don't think we're going to have room for it tonight. But I do want to separate this conversation between anti-Zionism being anti-Semitism as it relates to the Jews who live in Israel, as opposed to any particular political or policy difference you might have either internally in Israel with whatever's going on today or with the situation for Middle East peace. And if anybody wants to piggyback on.
Yeah. No, but very good. Thank you, Jordan. I think that probably covered that, but I will say this, in terms of the safety of the community, we do keep an eye on what's going on in Israel. I mean, it's very important that we do that. There are groups that will call for retaliation, and that retaliation can be worldwide. So it's not, it's not relegated to just retaliating in Israel. If there are issues in Israel, if there's conflict that's going on and there's a call for retaliation, we have to be concerned as North American Jews that this retaliation could be targeting us as well. So we really keep a close eye on those things as well. Next question. Yes.
Yes,
Oh, I'm sorry. We'll do this one here and then I'll make sure I get back over here.
if you look at the current issue of Jewish Light for that gentleman, you'll find a very good discussion of the two forms of anti-Semitism, the two forms. But what I wanted to know is there anything of artificial, is anybody in charge of artificial intelligence and where it's going to lead in anti-Semitism?
Wow. Jay, I'll let you grab that one.
Very good.
So pretty easy question to answer, which is no, nobody's in charge of artificial intelligence. It is a technical development that is sort of developing, much like how calculus was discovered in two places at once. The way that technical platforms develop these days, they are being developed simultaneously around the globe by a number of people with a number of different aims. Some have profit motives, some have nefarious motives. There is no, certainly not the FBI, is not in charge of the development of artificial intelligence. I think where it sort of dovetails with what we talk about tonight is not an FBI issue, but it is what is you as Americans want ethical constraints to be put on any private venture. And that's not an FBI job. We certainly keep track of developing technology because every piece of developing technology is both an opportunity for adversaries to use. It's a vulnerability for the people that we protect while upholding the Constitution. It's an opportunity for us as a potential technique, and it's a vulnerability for our organization as something that could potentially be used against us. We do have a specific developing technology unit at our FBI headquarters that is focused on nothing but looking at the global standards that are developing around artificial intelligence, as well as the capabilities that are developing within the artificial intelligence sphere, and tracking those and sort of being able to flag when something is being developed that we need to make sure that sort of the cyber defenders around the nation and around the world need to know about. We certainly have all of those private-public connections where we can share what we're learning as they can share what they're learning. Does that answer your question?
That's exactly correct. We're going to take one more question. I had someone here.
Hi. So we've heard tonight, and we all know that we're only 2.4% of the population, and we've heard that hate incidences have doubled over the last 3 years. How much percent of time are you working, and we are living in St. Louis, which has been the murder capital of the country at times. How much of your time or your committee's times is spent on Jewish issues versus everybody else?
Well, maybe for Jordan and I, that would be 100%.
I know, but for the
let's,
Attorney General. and for
Let's
the-
let the FBI and the US. Attorney-
Actually, I'm going to give Jordan a shout out. It's not 100% for Jordan. In fact, when the Dobbs decision was leaked last summer that changed Roe v. Wade in the nation, we immediately perceived that the Catholic institutes were going to come under attack. And the Catholic churches and followers have not hardened themselves the same way that Jewish institutions have for many, many hundreds and thousands of years. So when we saw the Dobbs decision leak, we actually got in touch with the Archdiocese here in St. Louis, and we invited our good friend Jordan in and others from the Jewish community and said, listen, it's time for you to figure out from the Jewish community how they have been protecting their parishioners and their properties. They have access to all of the inside baseball on where you get grant money from the federal government and what is available locally and who your neighborhood police officer is, where one of your institutions is. We connected them because they could certainly serve that community and provide them information that we just don't have access to in terms of how the Jewish community has hardened through grants and through focused effort for thousands of years. In terms of percentage of time, we don't break down our percentage of time on anti-Jewish bias versus other forms of bias in civil rights. I can tell you that based on the reporting, and this is consistent for the 30 years, I think, since the early 90s that we've produced this reporting, the number one most targeted group in a bias-motivated crime is the Black population. They account far and away about 60%, give or take any given year, for the percentages. Anti-religious bias actually sits in third place most of the time at around 10 or 11% behind sexual orientation. So it normally goes race, sexual orientation, and then religion. Now, within the religious bias, the Jewish group, although a smaller percentage of the population, does make up the majority of the targeted victim population. And that's why we're here tonight. And that's why one of my first calls when I got here, when I was new and Jordan was still new, was to Jordan. And I met Scott very early, and I got around to a lot of shuls and temples and synagogues early in my tenure, and talked with my terrorism group and my civil rights group about what are we doing to create relationships before crisis strikes so that they know who to call, and we will make sure to get a direct phone call so that we can respond immediately. So it is I don't want to give you a percentage because it'll be wrong, but it's a tremendous amount of our time that we spend developing inroads with all vulnerable communities, but that certainly includes the Jewish community here in St. Louis and across the nation and world. And I'll just throw this out there. So before I came to St. Louis, this is my fourth field office. I was the executive in charge of civil rights, among other things, for the Bureau globally. And when we changed our priorities to pump up hate crimes, the investigation of hate crimes, as one of our top investigative priorities for the agency, while I was an executive at headquarters, we had a conversation with the 19 leading Jewish members of the 19 largest Jewish constituencies in the nation. And then I fielded about 12 calls complaining about some of the other people who were included in that group and somebody else who should have been included in that group. But I'll spare you who was calling about whom and what they were talking about and whether we had the right levels of representation. But please know that we do a tremendous amount of outreach, and we're always open to more. So if you know somebody, if you're part of an organization, I've been out here with ADL. We've had Glass Leadership in my office. I've been here for JCRC. I was actually in the wrong room tonight, Scott, because I was over there the last time we had a JCRC meeting and I was like, where is everybody? Right? So we do a tremendous amount of outreach and we're happy to do more. Please, if you invite us, we'll show up.
And I'll piggyback on that before we finalize, and that Federation is also involved through JCRC and through Federation in our interfaith outreach. I'm really happy to say that the Jewish community has pretty much owned the non-for-profit security grant program. We've been the ones that have been able to show that nexus to terrorism probably the best and articulate that. But we're now working with outside groups. I work with the Islamic community. I work with the Hindu community. I work with the Christian community. And the only other grant in the NSGP in the what we call the UASI, the Urban Area Security Initiative for St. Louis, was received by an organization that was coached through the process by us at Federation for that NSGP grant. So, you know, just that outreach, we are out there looking, and that builds those relationships too. I can count on those folks to reach out to us if they, you know, see something that they think is problematic for our community. Well, listen, I want to thank everybody once again for being here tonight. I want to thank, how about our incredible group of panelists? And I'm going to turn this program back over to our professional society chair, Sandy Boxerman, because there's still more goodies, right? Still more things to do. So Sandy, please.
Okay, great. One of our goals as a professional society is to engage with all of you as our members and our donors by presenting programs of interest to you. I will be presumptuous and think that, or state that I think we did that tonight. And there's a lot of people to thank for that. Some of them have been thanked already, but you can never say thank you too much. First and foremost, the panel, Jay and Jordan and Christine and Scott. Thank you all very much. I knew this was going to be a great panel, but it was even better than I thought. Ruben Brown, thank you for your sponsorship of Professional Society. Stephen Davis, Dana Sandweiss, and the entire committee, thank you. Sharon Remus, our vice chair in charge of legal division. And Ellen Sewell, the Federation professional who oversees Professional Society. I say it every chance I get that a lot of people go into making everything we do a success, but if I had to pick one person who really makes it go, it's Ellen. She's fantastic. Now, we're almost done, but I can't let you go without telling you about our next event. It's November 7th. It'll be sponsored by the Business and Real Estate Division of Professional Society in partnership with the Young Professional Division. We're putting the committee together now. Some details have been finalized, but a lot still has to be determined. Our working topic is the Gateway South redevelopment. If you're asking, well, what is that? Come on November 7th and find out. We may talk about some other things that's still kind of in flux, but I think that will be one of the focuses. Okay, this ends the formal program, but a couple of housekeeping things. Drinks and dessert are out there. Please take advantage of that. The museum is still open for self-guided tours. And if you haven't had a chance to explore, or even if you have, you might want to take advantage of that. And I think our panelists may stick around for a little while if you want to talk to them and have a little bit of one-on-one time with them. Lawyers, don't forget your CLE certificates. All right. So with that, there's one group I didn't thank yet, and that's all of you for coming. So thank you very much.